Welcome back, nerds, to Off the Top TCG. I'm joined here with my co host, Drew, the law firm Bennett Kennett, part of Team Rare Candy, and I am Jeremy Jallin, commentator. What are we doing today, Drew?
Yeah, so today we're going to do something a little bit different than maybe you see in some other videos here. A lot of times you see a tier list, what people believe are going to be the best decks right now and in the format. Now that we have Pittsburgh this weekend and a couple days here, we are going to not necessarily do a tier list, but what we believe a meta prediction list is going to kind of look like. When you're going to a tournament and you're trying to pick the best deck for the event, sometimes that is not the best deck in the format. We've seen that in the past where decks can win an event even though it's not considered the best deck, and it will never be considered the best deck. However, it was the best deck for that tournament. Perfect example of that is NAIC this year with Inteleon Urshifu taking it down. I think everyone can agree that is not the best deck of the format. However, it was the best deck for that field, and it was able to take down the video or take down the tournament. So in this video, we're going to kind of talk about what we believe is going to be the meta based off of our testing and what we think the format is going to look like for the first tournament with Obsidian Flame Legal.
Yeah, and we got about 11 or so decks here, which is pretty crazy for the metagame in Pokemon so far. We're used to seeing a lot of kind of rock, paper, scissors formats, but lately, throughout the past year or so, it's just been mostly any deck can really take down the tournament. And so that's why we think that it's better to just get a meta share going on.
Yep, absolutely. Every deck I think on this list can win the event. Hitting the right matchups, having that little bit of luck on your side, a little bit of variance on your side, and just playing it as optimally as possible will definitely get you to a good finish, and it could win the event. I definitely think right now we start with what I personally think has been the best deck and one of the decks that is always on everyone's radar. We start with Gardevoir. Gardevoir is going to always be up there, probably always in the top five decks of the format. I do not personally, and Jeremy and I may have different opinions. You might hear us bounce it back and forth a little bit about what's going to be popular. I personally do not think Gardevoir will be the most played deck. However, I do think it is where it's hovering around that 12 to 15% right there. I think it's definitely going to be one of the top decks and something you are going to see if you want to win the event.
Yeah, coming off a big second place at Worlds with Tord Reklev, really just honing in that list of Mirage Step Corellia and making it so you're just ultra consistent, right? It is one of the most consistent decks in the format. As long as you get your ults down turn one, you're going to most likely see Corellias and start refinement and just get things going from there. Kind of snowballs the entire strategy. I do think it's going to be around that 12 to 15%. It might be one of the most played, but that's only if all of like the top decks are 12 to 15% range.
Mhm.
And it still has kind of a weird lost box matchup. There's some cards that you can maybe uh, help you in the matchup, like Cresselia and different things like that. But it's still winnable. It's not an auto loss.
Yep, absolutely. Definitely that's the boogeyman for the deck is Lost Box. Can it beat it? Yeah, absolutely. It's still a very close matchup no matter what. That's how strong Gardevoir is, which is why I think it will always be up in those top decks. So let's jump into Lost Box there then. We'll go turbo version of Lost Box right now because it is seeming it's always the most popular variant, I feel like. I think we might see something different in this event. But the turbo variant seems to always be up there in played decks. However, it never has the finishes that it should have when it's such a popular deck. Personally, I've played the deck, and I think that's because of the inconsistency of the turn 1 7. Turn 2 10 happens a little bit more often, but the turn 1 7, not as much. So I think, personally, I think it's down in that 9 to 12. I
9 to
think
12.
it'll I think it'll be, and I think it's on the lower end of that 9 to 12, maybe 10% ish. I don't think it's the best Lost Box variant. This is, by the way, specifically the turbo version of the deck. So not Kyogre, not Tina, not Sablezard. This is just the turbo version that we are placing here. Kyogre isn't even on our list here, but that's going to be down. And not a lot of people usually bring Kyogre to events. But this turbo Lost Box, I would say 9 to 12, a little bit less just because the results haven't been good for the deck. It doesn't typically do well.
Yeah, we've seen it do well more day one of these tournaments than converting those day twos into top eights and wins. And I feel like Lost Box in general with the meta share that Arcanine Labs does for these tournaments kind of gets lumped in all together. Like if you're playing Comfey and Sableye, it's just one statistic and you end up seeing it maybe like 16 to 20%. But
Mhm.
if we're separating them out like this, I do think it's going to be one of the more played variants.
Mhm.
Uh, but I do agree, sitting at like the 9 to 10% there.
Yep, absolutely. And then the other Lost Box variant that we have on this list is Sablezard. A little bit different of version. This one runs the Radiant Charizard instead of the Radiant Greninja. That's the primary difference. You have access to bigger hard hitters earlier on, and kind of just really focused around the consistency throughout the entire game instead of just that turn one, like the Turbo version. Sablezard has not been popular. However, the Lost City decks that have been around are seeing a lot less play right now, and that was the biggest boogeyman for these Sablezard decks. Is Lost City was not easy to beat, but now with Arceus decks starting to see less play, they're not as good going into the new meta. I think Sablezard makes a resurgence. However, I do think it's in that less than 5%. I think the more this format goes on, we'll start seeing this pop up more and more. But it is a deck that you want to be a seasoned veteran with it in order to play it. It's not something you want to just pick up because the combos you have to do are a little bit more challenging. And it is one of those decks where your flower selectings, they're not just hard, sometimes they're impossible. You need both cards to win the game. You play so many one of, so sometimes they are just impossible flower selectings, which is where a deck like this gets a little bit iffy for a large event like these. But there's a lot of people who have had a lot of success with it. Pedro Torres is one of that, just off the top of my head. But I still think right now, still a little bit too early for the deck. I'm considering playing it for my cups, but that's about where I think that deck is.
It is also one of those Lost Zone decks that can utilize Path to the Peak very efficiently. Even though your main attacker late game Radiant Charizard needs that Excited Heart ability, you're able to kind of play the game to where you can get rid of it by the time you need to. And Path to the Peak is one of the best stadium cards right now in the format, and we see it in a multitude of decks. And I feel like if you have it in your deck, you're going to have at least a good matchup against a majority of the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And jumping into the Path of the Peak deck, let's jump into the Configuratina version, which is what I think both the best and the best Lost Box deck, as well as the best Path of the Peak deck of the format. Which I do think Tina is going to be the number one played deck.
And I
Personally,
agree as well. Yeah, it just seems really obvious. You're able to deal consistent damage, and then its Star Requiem V Star attack just knocks out anything. So even if you're not able to knock something out in one hit with that 280, you could still get that one shot with just 10 in the Lost Zone, and then you also have Cramorant and Sableye to be extra attackers for each of your matchups.
right, yeah, Cramorant, Sableye, the reason those are so good is because they destroy the little guys. They destroy the things that are trying to evolve. However, once your opponent starts evolving, they get a lot worse. Tina have an automatic one-shot potential, does a consistent 280 damage every single time you attack with it. It's going to handle those big guys a lot better. Tina, strong deck when it's going, even when it's not going, which is the issue for the deck. The first couple turns when you're sitting there abyss seeking because your hand is just garbage, then you get judged or Iono'd. Now you have to abyss seeking again because all your Colress are to the bottom. The deck has some awkward clunkers, that's for sure. But because of Roxanne Path, it is never out of the game. Because that combo is just ridiculous. Roxanne Path, Sableye, your Bibarel. Sableye, your draw engine. Or Tina, your draw engine. Tina, your Pidgeot. Whatever you might be doing with your draw engine. That is just such a game ender, even though it's the first move that Tina can make sometimes. Is just doing that Roxanne Path. So I think it's going to have a lot of people gravitate towards it. Not to mention, it's a little bit more friendly for flower selectings. Um, which is kind of that trade off for being a little bit less consistent or a little bit less fast, I would say.
Yeah, still a lot of thinking because you're a Lost Zone deck, but not as much as something like a Turbo Lost Zone or that Sablezard. And It's just pretty consistent in what it does as long as you draw a course experiment. I think we could say that for most Lost Zone decks,
Mhm.
but Giratina just has the better matchup spread versus everything else.
Yep. Absolutely. And we just talked about three different Lost Zone decks. And when there are three different Lost Zone, we even brought up a fourth one in Kyogre, which we don't have it on this list, but it would be down in that under 5% category there. And when things like that happen, when we are expecting so much Lost Zone, everyone expects so much Lost Zone, that's where the deck that won NAIC in Urshifu and Teleon comes in and kind of can run a format or run a tournament. I think that Inteleon Urshifu is actually better positioned than it has been in a long time. No, not a lot of people are countering it. Are there all that many counters? Manaphy doesn't counter it because you just Yoga Loop it. The deck is solid to an extent, but it also just has non-games that
Yeah.
happen. One thing with it is you will finish your match. You're not tying, you're finishing your match one way or the other. I'm inclined to put into the 5 to 10 or 5 to 9 right there. I think it's going to be a much more popular deck than we have seen in the past, so it's not going to be in that below 5% range. However, it's not going to be in the top half. I don't think when the graphic comes out and we see those top played decks, I don't think we're going to see Inteleon or Shifu on that list. It'll be off to the side where, oh yeah, and also 6% of people are playing this deck.
Yeah.
Um, that's how
It
I see this deck.
it is also one of those decks in this format where if you hit the right matchups, you can win the tournament. We saw it with Cyrus Davis, where she just took down NAIC, and it was pretty handily too. You have a lot of those matchups in those Lost Box, United Wings, anything with low HP that has a bunch of small Pokemon. You're able to take them out, and Metacham EX and that Yoga Loop attack is just disgusting when it goes off.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes apart a lot of these lost box strategies. Anything that evolves really on this list, it really takes apart. Tina, one of the reasons it's going to be the most played is because it has a better time versus the counters to lost box because it has that second attacker and a big attacker of Giratina V Star, which is why that's up there. But yeah, I think that's the counter deck of the event. It's the counter deck of the format, I would say right now.
And speaking of counter decks, Arceus, Giratina, Judge Path, and Prey. That is the name of the game for this deck. It has been for however long it's been out. And I do feel like it is another one of those decks where it is a very good path to the peak deck. Where would you put this?
I'm saying it's going lower. I personally am down there in the under 5.
Wow.
I think Arctina is close to as bad of a meta deck you can get. I think it's one of the worst path decks of the format of all the ones that we're kind of talking about, right? Like Tina is a path deck. We'll talk about a couple other ones, but I think it's the worst path deck of the format because the power level of it isn't actually good. You're kind of pathing, which is obviously a good combo, but the Tina, you're just worse than the other Tina decks. So why am I playing this route? So I don't think it's going to be that popular. However, last time I said that, it won the event. So that's an option. But popularity wise doesn't mean it can't win the event, which is kind of why we're doing this type of list instead of a tier list. Kind of the whole point of this is I don't think it's going to be that popular, but hitting those right matchups, it will win the event, just like it has in the past.
I don't know. I kind of feel it's maybe on the lower end of 5 to 9.
Okay. You think it's going to
Uh,
see a little bit of an increase from what we've been seeing? Because I think it was almost non-existent at Worlds. It was very few people played at Worlds.
yeah, you're
Obviously, we
right.
have a new format, but
Would you put it in front of Lost Zone Charizard?
oh god, I'm not thinking that much. I'm not thinking tiers within tiers. That's why we have the range here. Um, yeah, probably. I would still say it's probably more popular than Radiant, than Sablezard.
All right, moving on to the next deck. We're talking about Paths of the Peak decks. We can at least talk about the Miraidon Flaffy, Mahone's list that
Mhm.
has been very popular since Worlds. And
Very popular and doing really well.
yeah,
You've had success with it. A lot of people have had success with. And I'm going to lump together not just Path to the Peak in this version, because obviously Sejun Park also has had a lot of success with Miraidon. They do not play the Path to the Peak. It's just a straightforward Miraidon list that they run. But when we combine both those, I expect Miraidon to be heavily played. I think it's up there in that 12 to 15%
Oh
range.
wow. Okay.
The deck is good. You've played it. I've played against it multiple times. I've been playing Miraidon since it has come out. It's always been that deck that I just wish was slightly better. And right now, I think people believe it's slightly better. Even if it may not be the best deck in the format, I think it is. The results it had at Worlds is going to pick it up for this event, and then we'll start seeing it drop off quite a bit.
Yeah, it does have kind of a shaky Lost Zone matchup for a lot of those decks out there. Sableye is just very good at spreading damage and kind of getting around the energy requirements that's needed for Miraidon and stuff. Just pick off those flaffies here and there. And it does have Raichu V as a way to kind of combat a lot of the bigger HP Pokemon in the format. And I think we've seen that utilized very well, especially with the Dynamotor engine. Uh,
Mhm.
if it reaches that 12 to 15%, I'll be surprised. I was
Okay.
hovering more around 9 to 12, but I can put it there for you because I, I don't know. I like the deck. It's definitely consistent and it's also easy to play.
Yeah. Which a lot of people go into their first regional this season. 1,800 people, huge event. Probably easier, might be good for them. Might be something people gravitate towards right now. But yeah, I don't know. I can see both 9 to 12, 12 to 15. I'm just thinking, I don't know. I'm thinking it's going to be the tournament for Miraidon. I would be teching for Miraidon or planning on beating Miraidon for this event. Absolutely.
All right, what should we talk about next? The World Championship deck, Mew.
Yeah, let's jump into it. We have not forgot about Mew. I know a lot of people hate talking about Mew. It's been around. It's Mew. It's the boogeyman. It just won Worlds. Where is it gonna be? Mew is such a random animal. This is a tournament where I think we're doing that seesaw, right? Worlds was the perfect storm for Mew. When Mew does not have the perfect storm, oh gosh, it's bad. It is such a bad deck when it's not a perfect event. And I think right now people believe it is not the best deck. So I personally I think 5 to 9. I think it'll be on the higher end of that. So maybe we can put in that 9 to 12. But I just think people are going to gravitate away from it because of its success it just had, which usually brings out the Drapions, the Spirit Tombs, the Kyogres of the format,
Yeah,
and that kind of is where we see Mew drop off for a little bit, couple tournaments, let it hide in the shadows, bam, wins Worlds is what we see.
the reason I think it's probably 9 to 12 is just the again the ease of play factor, the ease of actually getting the cards. It's just two battle decks and you got the deck basically.
Mhm.
And again, 1,800 people. A lot of people will gravitate towards something they already know, something they're comfortable with, and I think that's where Mew kind of shines, just because it's one of the oldest decks out
Yeah.
of all these cards, outside of what in Inteleon Urshi.
Yep. I think that's the only one older than it. Yep. But I agree with you. I think that that 9 to 12 is perfectly reasonable. Not to mention, here's the idea behind Mew is I am going to play the game each round, which is something that we kind of see from other decks where Sableye just destroys them before you get to play, or you're playing a Comfy deck and you don't draw Chorus Experiment. You don't play the game sometimes in the event. Mew has been kind of agreed upon that if I'm playing Mew, I'm probably playing every single round some sort of Pokemon. Whether I'm behind, whether I'm dominating, whatever it might be, whether it's a close game, you are playing the game every single round, which is something that you want to do. You want to play. You have a higher chance of winning when you play than when you just sit there and pass.
Yeah, and that is really what people are trying to do, right? If you can just get some games out of your rounds, you'll have a chance to make day two. You'll have a chance to make that top 32 to get $1,000, and from there, who knows? You can hit the right matchups, make it into top eight, and try to take down the entire thing. Get your world's invite, get $10,000, and we've seen it happen before with Mew, and I'm sure just a simple Alessa Sparkle Meloetta attack turn one can do a lot for you.
Again, absolutely. Dunk in most things will win you some rounds for sure. Now, a deck that does not donk, a deck that cannot donk, definitely Lugia. Lugia T-Tar, we're going to throw single strike. The colorless version, we're not really going to talk about. Single strike version is the one we're going to focus on. Colorless version, we would count as like a rogue deck. We're not even going to put it on the list. But right where you're hovering, I say 9 to 12. I think it's going to be a very popular deck, and I think it's going to increase in popularity. Like I said yesterday, I hate the deck. I think it's terrible. But hey, if it's your day, you win the slot machine rolls, you are going to dominate the event. It happens. You have the right coin flips, you're going to win. That deck has so strong against everything, but it is a little bit weaker than it has been. Of course, we. I'm talking post rotation. Of course, before rotation, it was unbeatable, right? That was the whole point of it. But post rotation, it is a little bit weaker right now. A lot of things. It doesn't dominate once it has the turn two Archeops anymore like it
Yeah.
used to. You can't. Other decks can beat it now. So I think we'll see it start picking up because it does have a good meta matchup against some of these decks, like Miraidon. Matchups very favorable. Guardy very pretty close. Actually, I think it would be Guardy favored. I don't think it was very good for Lugia. However, Guardy's probably taken out Temple Sinnoh a lot. So there's these matchups that it just has a positive matchup against, which is where people, especially a lot of top players, will get their testing in and realize, okay, Lugia's in a good spot. I want to play Lugia right now, and they'll go with it.
Yeah, it is one of those decks that is very reliant on winning that opening coin flip. You want to go first with this deck every time just so you can get that Lugia V-Star out turn two, because without that, you cannot play the game. You're not going to charge up 4 energy on multiple Pokemon and try to attack and hope you can do well. You're going to need that Summoning Star and get those Archeops and charge up all those Pokemon for whatever matchup you might have. And that's the thing about Lugia is it does have a lot of different Pokemon for different matchups. So as long as you're able to get those charged up, you can have a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a powerful deck when it works. It hasn't done it for me, but we'll see. Maybe one day. But now we have the two newest decks on the list. We'll start with Shen Pao because it is Shen Pao Baxcalibur specifically. And I think right there, that 5 to 9, this deck is strong when it sets up. Right now, I think we're in an awkward time where actually, since the card has come out, I don't think it's been agreed upon on what the proper list is. No one knows. Do you play cross switchers? Do you not play cross switchers? Do you play Lost City? Do you play Skate Park? Like, there is not a list that can be agreed upon by people. Now we add in the mix of Pidgeot versus Babarrel.
Yeah.
What are people doing with this list? I just don't. I think everyone has the same experience as me, where you test a bunch of different things for this deck, and nothing is dominant, and everything is kind of just mid, which is kind of what I think this deck is. Yes, you will win a lot of games by just overwhelming your opponent, but if you actually take into account the games you lose and you're not just focusing on the wins, it usually averages out to be a pretty mid deck. And I think that's what we see, and that's why we haven't been able to really agree upon a list as a community right now.
Yeah, even so, speaking of Cyrus again, she got ninth at Worlds with Palkia V-Star with Qian Pao. Just no Baxcalibur, so that's another wrench of a list to throw into things where you might want to debate doing something like that. But I do feel like Baxcalibur, its ability is just insane. It always has been insane, and if you're able to get set up, things are going to go well. And I feel you kind of would say the same thing about Miraidon, but Miraidon, at least with the Paths of the Peakless, has a little bit more game against your opponents, where Champao Baxcalibur, you don't really stop what your opponent's doing. You're just trying to set yourself up, and if you can't get there, your opponent's just going to keep rolling.
Yeah, yeah. If you the only disruption you have is turn two Greninja if they don't have Manaphy, like that's your disruption. And I mean, if they have Manaphy, you have to clone it, boss it, cross switcher. Once again, who knows which of those cards you're playing? And you have to hit all of them on turn two to really dominate a board state. I think the deck is very good, and I'm scared to play against it because if my opponent pops off with it, it beats just about every deck.
Yeah.
So it's a scary deck to play against. However, for a large event, I don't expect it to see much play. Definitely in that 5 to 9 for me.
I do feel like one can maybe squeak into the top 8 and try to do
Mm-hmm.
something there, but again, the person's going to have to run hot the entire weekend. There's so many people you have to go through. 9 rounds Swiss day one, 6 rounds of Swiss day two. That's a lot of rounds to stay consistent.
Yeah,
And I think the thing you see with a lot of the higher played decks on this list is that they're just consistent. They're able to get set up, do what they want to do, and uh, it's just all about matchups from there.
yep. And who knows? I haven't been working on Shen Pao since NAIC. So who knows? There could be a deck builder out there who has been religiously working on Excalibur, and they figured out how to make this deck consistent. We're talking about it being inconsistent, and that's its weakness. Maybe someone figured it out, and they could take down the event pretty easily if they were able to. If someone was able to figure out this deck in a way that works for them, then I could see it winning the event if someone has the right list.
Yeah.
I don't know the list because I haven't really been working on it or haven't been able to find it.
So you're saying Blissey V might be a good card to add in?
No,
No.
because I did try that. I did try that one, and it is real not good.
All right. Well, speaking of real not good, no. We have our newest deck from Obsidian Flames. Two cards that look to make a big impact in the format, but other than that, the set really has been kind of a letdown. And that's
Yep.
Charizard EX and Pidgeot EX.
Yep, Charizard EX and Pidgeot, and I'm going to keep my bias of much I like this deck out of it and say it's going to be in the 5 to 9.
Oh, 5 to 9. Okay.
I do. I think I'm going, like I said, keeping my bias out, and I'm going to go with what I see people testing and what people believe the results of this deck show. And that is that it's going to decrease in popularity. We've had enough cups and online events for people to try it. They were like, cool, this fun new toy was fun. Throwing it away, I'm going to go back to my pet deck of Giratina or Guardy, right? And that's where I see this tournament happening. I don't think enough people saw success with the deck to want to bring it in big numbers to this event.
Yeah, and I can see that. And the fact that people have been playing cups for the past few weeks now in this format, you kind of get a good idea of what people are going to bring competitively, at least. But there is still that aspect of kind of waiting until this big tournament, until this regionals where you can just get your invite right now. You can get that $10,000. I really hope that we see something from Obsidian Flames that will kind of break out and become a new meta deck. I think Charizard is one of those cards that has the potential for it, but it is also just a stage two. It is the same inconsistencies that you would have for any other stage two, or any other deck that relies on abilities. And Pats at the Peak is very popular, so I guess we'll have to see how it shapes up.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, it's one of those decks where I do believe it can win the event. All the decks on this list, I think, can win Pittsburgh this weekend. However, you're going to need the right field. You need the right list. If you know your list, that's the most important thing about lists. Don't be changing things up. I know you hear people talk about it all the time. Don't change things up the night before unless you're very confident on it. You've tested it. You know it's going to work. Theorymon is not as important as actual testing anymore. There used to be a time when you could theory this card's going to be good in a matchup. Don't fall into that trap right now. It is going to be what you practice, stick with it. Because that's what you know. That's what you know will work and when it will work. Instead of just, oh, I think this is going to work here. You play against it. Nope, didn't work at all. Miserable. Don't do that ever again. Which is something that happened to me multiple times. But this is kind of where, I guess, Jeremy, do you have anything you want to switch around on this list after talking about it a little bit?
Uh, hmm.
I think for me, I'm between. So I want. So between for me, I'm Miraidon, Mew, and Lugia. I think either Mew or Lugia should replace Miraidon. I just don't know which one. I think it's going to be very close between those three meta shares. I think we'll probably see those three be very, very close in this event. I just don't know which one's going to be a little bit more popular.
I think it'd probably be like that.
Okay, so you're thinking Mew will be I can get behind it. I can get behind that. I think these little changes aren't by much percentage points. You're going to be playing against all of them. Really, any of those 9 to 12 and up, you're probably going to have to beat to win the event.
Yeah.
So those little changes, but I think I agree. I think those three are pretty interchangeable for me in the tier list. Everything else I think looks pretty solid in my opinion.
Yeah, other than us just not believing in Kyogre.
I never said I don't believe in Kyogre. I think the deck's good. Kyogre never has a huge following. It usually does well, but it never has a huge following. Maybe we'll see it. Maybe that'll replace the Sablezard. We'll probably. I could see us seeing more Kyogre than Sablezard for this event.
All right, redo the whole list. Let's go.
Whole list. Let's do it. Okay, new video coming out tomorrow. But yeah, so let us know if you liked our kind of meta list, our meta percent share list instead of a tier list. I know tier lists get a little funky. Everyone has their own opinions, their own testing, and tier list doesn't necessarily match results. So
Yeah.
this is kind of what we expect. Take this with a grain of salt. This is just our opinions. This is how we prepare for tournaments. We try to figure out the meta so that we can pick the right deck. Which deck on this list do you think has the best matchup versus what you believe is going to be the most played decks? Because it is not possible to beat every single deck. It just isn't. I don't care what you say. I don't care what rogue deck you have. It's not. You are not like it's not right now. There's all these decks can win the event. There's too many different decks that do different things. But let us know if you like this type of video. I like doing it because this is where my brain prepares for tournaments, and this is how I think when I'm trying to prepare. So I want you guys to kind of have that image inside my mind about how I prepare for events, so that you can hopefully gain some value from it.
Yeah, it's definitely a great way to look at the tournament in general. Just being able to kind of look at it as a broad meta, and then kind of narrow it down to what you want to play as the days come closer.
Mhm.
And I feel like with uh 2 days until Pittsburgh, it's gonna be pretty exciting because this is also the first big tournament of this format. We only have about three or so, two of them in Europe, one here in North America. So it's gonna put a lot of emphasis on Obsidian Flames and what it can do to kind of shake things up, or if we're just gonna have like a repeat of Worlds and Mew just comes out and dominates, or Lasso and Giratina is able to do very well in Swiss, and it'll be interesting to see how things shape up. I'm really rooting for at least Pidgeot EX to find its way into a winning deck because Quick Search is amazing, and I want to see more of that card.
Yeah, quick search is fun. So it's always a fun card. Hopefully we do. I want to see Charizard do well, personally. I want to see Charizard. I want to see Baxcalibur do well. Those are probably my two favorite decks of the format right now, Baxcalibur and Charizard. So those are the decks I'm wanting to see dominate right now.
But that does it for us today. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe off the top TCG on every social media that we did. I don't know. We'll make some TikToks soon. So
Maybe. Yeah, we'll try to get to the TikTok somehow.
all right. Have a good day, y'all.